During this module, we'll cover conditional discrimination training and emergent equivalence relations, also called relational responding. So we've covered stimulus control, but what about conditional stimulus discriminations? Conditional stimulus discrimination is differential responding in the presence of different stimuli, further discriminated by conditional stimuli. Think of it as an if X stimulus, then Y behavior relation. This is an example of an experimental setup to establish stimulus control. I'll always select A because A has in the past been associated with FR1 reinforcement, and B has been associated with extinction. A is an SD and B is an S delta. However, we can easily establish conditional stimulus discrimination in this context. If the conditional SD is red, select A. If the conditional SD is green, select B. Selection of A will be reinforced in the presence of the red stimulus, but selection of B will be reinforced in the presence of the green stimulus. The amazing thing about conditional stimulus control is that teaching some stimulus-stimulus relations can lead to emergence of untrained relational responding. This is something that has been studied in many fields outside of behavior analysis as well, including linguistics. For example, if I teach you that the name of this stimulus is wug, you'll probably later be able to select it from a variety of stimuli if I ask you to point to the wug. I taught you to say wug in the presence of a wug. Now, you'll point to the wug when I say wug. Do you remember what type of emergent relation that would be? Emergent relations are reflexivity, symmetry, and transitivity. Stimuli are considered to be part of an equivalence class if behavior shows reflexivity, symmetry, and transitivity between those stimuli. To review a bit, reflexivity is simply identity matching to sample. I show you a sailboat, and you select sailboat from the array. The stimuli in the array are two S deltas and an SD. The sailboat sample is the conditional SD, and an additional conditional SD might be the instruction to match or pick the same. Here's another example. I show you the word boat, and you select the word boat. Simple as that. It may seem simple, but keep in mind that this only counts as reflexivity if I've never trained you to do this. This repertoire is also sometimes called generalized identity matching. Here's an example of an experimental setup teaching a pigeon conditional discriminations. First, the pigeon engages in an observing response by pecking the sample. Think of it as holding up the sample stimulus and saying, "Look at me." Then, if the pigeon pecks the matching comparison stimulus, reinforcement is delivered. There's a 15-second interval between trials, and the next trial begins. If, however, the pigeon pecks a comparison that does not match the sample, the behavior is not reinforced, and the delay to reinforcement may even function as negative punishment. Again, this isn't as simple as red equals reinforcement and green equals extinction. Red equals reinforcement if the red sample stimulus appears, and green equals reinforcement if the green sample stimulus appears. These procedures don't have to be as straightforward as simple identity matching to sample. Some other relations include oddity matching to sample and arbitrary matching to sample. In the case of oddity matching to sample, an additional conditional SD would be something like pick the one that is different. Arbitrary matching to sample involves establishing relations between stimuli that are not based on physical topography. The word boat has nothing physically to do with a picture of a boat, but as a verbal community, we reinforce saying the word boat in the presence of a boat, writing the word boat when we hear the word boat, etc. So let's say that I start out by teaching you some responses. I teach you to say boat in the presence of a picture of a boat, and also to say boat out loud when you see the word boat. Now, if I say boat and you select a picture of a boat out of an array of stimuli, or point to the word boat out of a page of different words, a symmetrical relation has emerged. I've never directly taught you to engage in this behavior. It's free learning. If you're also able to select a picture of a boat when you see the word boat, and vice versa, transitivity has emerged. Again, it only counts as transitivity if this was not directly taught. There are many variables that can make the emergence of relational responding more or less likely. Firstly, we've seen that more opportunities for the contact of consequences, both reinforcement and punishment or extinction, can lead to better and more efficient establishment of stimulus control. Here's one we haven't covered though, the intertrial interval. You may have been wondering why there's a break programmed in between trials in most experimental studies. Well, it turns out that if you present trials back to back too quickly, you're likely to see carryover effects. Essentially, the stimulus that was presented in the previous trial may still be exerting stimulus control in the current trial. A short break can eliminate that effect. However, we don't want the break to be too long, again to ensure a high rate of learning opportunities. As discussed in previous module, an observing response makes it more likely for the SDs and conditional SDs to be salient and more reliably affect behavior. A lot more research needs to be conducted on this topic, but the number of stimuli presented in an array at the same time can certainly have an effect on learning, as can the number of relations being taught at once. For example, we need at least 2 non-examples included with an example in an array. But would it be beneficial to include more? Should we cycle between trials teaching car, boat, and bike, or just teach boat first? This is a huge area of ongoing research to truly perfect our applied practice. Finally, agility. The more relations between stimuli that are directly taught, the more likely emergence of relations between new stimuli becomes. Typically developing adults can typically show emergent relational responding between new stimuli very quickly, based on a long learning history. But children, or individuals with developmental disabilities, may need a longer period of training trials. This may also be why testing of emergent relations with non-human animals has only been occasionally successful. That's not to say it's impossible, though. In the study summarized here, the observing response itself was also an additional conditional discriminative stimulus. If the observing key was on the left, then pecking the red key was reinforced. If it was on the right, then the green key produced reinforcement. Bearing in mind, of course, that the position of the red and green keys did alternate. Let's visualize that. The pigeon is in an operant conditioning chamber with 2 keys. One lights up. That's the SD occasioning an observing response. If that observing key was on the left, pecking the red key would be reinforced. If, however, the observing key appeared on the right, pecking the green comparison would then be reinforced. Here's the very cool test for symmetry. In testing trials, after all the training has taken place, what will happen if 2 red keys are presented? How would you respond and why? And what if both keys were green? Here are the results of the study. Each bar represents a different pigeon. The black data series shows how often they pecked correctly, on the left when the keys were red, on the right when the keys were green, before any training took place. You can see that it's simply at chance responding levels. The bars show the test of symmetry after training took place. Some pigeons did all right with over 80% accuracy. This may indicate that creating conditional discriminative stimuli in the form of observing responses exerts better stimulus control over subsequent behavior. There's a lot of research out there showing ineffective conditional discrimination training, both with non-human animals and with individuals with developmental disabilities. But it's entirely possible that we simply need to improve our procedures.